first grade, welcome back. Today we are going to read The Aztec in the Palace of the Emperor. Our learning objectives are to compare civilizations of the Maya and Aztec, describe the actions and characteristics of an Aztec ruler, demonstrate an understanding of the words emperor, empress, and empire, illustrate key information about the Aztec, identify important aspects of Aztec cities and leaders, and write a summary statement about Aztec cities and leaders. Our key vocabulary are emperor, empire, palace, retreat, and wealth. Emperor is a noun, and an emperor is the ruler of an empire. Her favorite tale was the one about the emperor and his new clothes. Empire is also a noun, and an empire is the people and land controlled by one ruler. It took a long time to travel from one end of the empire to the other. Palace, another noun, and a palace is a grand home for kings or queens or emperors. The king and queen lived in a palace on a hill outside of town. Retreat. Retreat is a verb. Remember, verbs are our action words. And retreat means to move away from something or leave. The boys got on their bikes to retreat from the smelly skunks. Wealth. Wealth is a noun, and wealth is valuable possessions. Precious stones made up most of the king's wealth. Let's review what we know already. So, where did the Maya live? They lived on the Yucatan Peninsula, right here, okay? And where did the Aztecs live? In what we now call Mexico City, but back then it was on Lake Texcoco, right? What did we learn about the Aztecs? What did we learn about their religion? They're polytheistic, meaning they believe in many gods and goddesses. And they believe that those gods and goddesses gave them signs, right? What was the sign that the gods gave the Aztecs? And what did it mean? The sign was the eagle eating a snake on top of the cactus, right? And it meant that the Aztecs were home. They did not have to travel anymore. They could settle where they were, okay? What about farming? What did we learn about the Aztecs and farming? What did they build? Chinampas. And what were chinampas? They were floating gardens, right? And they made those out of reeds and branches and mud. And what kind of crops did they grow on those? Beans, maize or corn, potatoes, tomatoes, all sorts of stuff, right? Now, let's think back about the Maya again. What kind of leaders did the Mayans have? Kings and priests, right? And do you remember the names of two of those kings? King Pakal and his son, King Khan Balon. Okay? We're going to be learning about the emperor, Montezuma, and he ruled the Aztec Empire a long, long time ago. Okay? Remember our key vocabulary: emperor, empire, palace, retreat, and wealth. So we're going to be learning about Montezuma II, and he was the emperor of the Aztec Empire, okay? So what's an emperor again? The ruler of an empire, like a king or a queen. An emperor usually rules over people and their land. The people and the land that the emperor rules over is called an empire. So if the Aztec have an emperor, what would the Aztec civilization be considered? An empire, okay? I want you to listen carefully to find out what kind of leader the Aztec had and how this was the same or different from the leaders that the Maya had. Montezuma II, emperor of the Aztec people, commander of the fierce Aztec army, highest of high priests, was moving through his immense palace in the city of Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Aztec Empire. So what are palaces again? grand homes for kings, queens, and emperors. Before him walked one of the four most important Aztec nobles who served the emperor. Dressed in brightly colored cotton clothing, the nobleman's head was encircled by magnificent tropical bird feathers that stuck out of a headdress made of gold. This fancily dressed nobleman led the way through the halls of the palace toward the throne room, passing one of the enormous dining halls and turning down a corridor running between two large libraries. Far behind in the gigantic palace lay hundreds of bedrooms, including the great emperor's, where the bed sheets would be slept upon just once and then thrown away. Behind him, the nobleman heard the steady slapping of the emperor's golden sandals upon the floor, and the swishing of the leaves as the nobles fanned the emperor's body to keep him cool as he walked. Sounds like a fancy life, doesn't it? They entered the throne room. It was more than half full already, with men and women looking down silently, for they knew that the emperor was approaching, and no one was allowed to look at the emperor's face. Those who were wearing shoes had already slipped out of them, for they knew they must take them off in Emperor Montezuma's presence. Quietly to yourself, think about what an emperor is. Think of one word that describes Emperor Montezuma. Okay. The feathered nobleman stopped as he approached the throne, standing aside and turning his eye downward as Montezuma walked forward and sat down upon his jeweled throne. Montezuma was a man whose wealth could not even be measured. This means that Montezuma was so rich that it was impossible to figure out exactly how rich he was. In his palace were entire rooms filled with gold and silver and everything from fabulous hand-carved jewelry to masks. Now another of the emperor's noblemen spoke. "O speaker," he began. This was the emperor's most important title, for it meant that he was who was thought to speak to the gods in order to keep them on the side of the Aztec. Remember, like the Maya, the Aztec believed in many gods that controlled different things. Today there are lords here from the eastern part of your empire. Lords are owners of land or other property. They come to pay their respects to you, but also to bring more details of the strangers who have come from the east. The nobleman brought the lords forward. The emperor said, "We have reports of strangers riding upon huge deer. What have you seen with your own eyes, and what have you heard?" Now the oldest of the visiting lords, forcing himself not to look upward upon Montezuma's face, told the emperor, "I too have seen these men, but now their leader has done something we do not understand. He has ordered his people to burn the wooden ships at sea. They are now camped on the shore with their deer." Can you guess what the huge deer were that the strangers were riding? They were horses. The Aztecs had never seen horses. Montezuma was giving his full attention to the man's words. Then he turned to the snake woman who stood beside his throne. Oddly, the snake woman, the second most important person in the government, was not a woman at all, but a man. The title of Snake Woman was given to a man in honor of one of the Aztec goddesses whose importance was second only to the gods of the sun and rain. The Snake Woman helped the emperor run the nation. "Does the burning of wooden ships mean that they intend to never leave our lands?" the emperor asked the Snake Woman. The Snake Woman replied, "I do not know, O Emperor, but it seems to show that the strangers feel safe enough here to cut off their own form to retreat." Remember, to retreat from something means to move away from it or leave it. Since the visitors are burning their ships, they must be planning to stay and not retreat or leave. The snake woman nodded to the nobleman, who continued, "There is other news. These strangers have made friends with the Todenoks, the people of Simpolale, and together with them they are starting in this direction." At this, a worried murmur ran through all of those in the throne room, for the Todenoks of Simpolale were the enemies of the Aztec. So why would the strangers make friends with the Aztec enemies? What do you think they're planning to do? Do you think they're planning to attack the Aztec? Maybe. The lords continued their report, followed by reports on other matters by other servants of Montezuma. Afterward, the nobleman with the magnificent feathers once again led the emperor through the halls, this time to his main dining hall. A dining hall is a place where people eat meals. There, Montezuma and hundreds of his nobles sat down to a feast, eating off beautiful plates that were given away after just one use. They seem kind of wasteful, throwing away sheets after only sleeping on them one time, throwing away dishes after just eating off of them one time. Later, Montezuma and his chief advisors met together, and the emperor said, "Send gold and silver to the leaders of these strangers. Let the nobles who bring these gifts tell the strangers that they are on Aztec land ruled by Emperor Montezuma, who send these small tokens of his power and wealth." So the emperor wants to show off his riches or his wealth to assert or prove his power. "They will know from these gifts that the great wealth and power we wield here, and perhaps they will turn and leave our empire." Who do you think these strangers are, guys? Who do you think they are? Let's see if you're right the next time that we read, okay? Hold on to those thoughts. That was the end of our story. We're going to do some comprehension and word work. So if you need a wiggle break, hop up, go wiggle, and come back. All right, who was the emperor of the Aztec in this story? Montezuma II, but Montezuma, right? Why does Montezuma want to send the strangers gifts? To show how powerful he is, right? And he's hoping that they'll leave. Do you think that the strangers are going to leave once they receive the gifts? Why or why not? This is your opinion. All right, now it's time for word work. In the read aloud you heard, Montezuma II, Emperor of the Aztec people. I want you to say the word emperor with me. Emperor. An emperor is a ruler of an empire. A female emperor is called an empress. The emperor ruled his empire very strictly. Montezuma was the emperor of the Aztec, so people were not allowed to look at him, and every time he ate, he used new plates. What would it be like if you were an emperor or empress? Try to use the word emperor or empress when you talk about it. What's the word we've been talking about? Emperor or empress. All right, guys. Where would we put this card? Leaders, cities, farming, writing, religion. Leaders, right? Because that is Montezuma, which is their emperor, and an emperor is a leader. What about this? This is Tenochtitlan, okay? Where would this go? Leaders, cities, religion, farming, writing. Cities, right? Okay. So let's make sure that we have hit all of our learning objectives before I let you go to do your activity and write your sentence. We compared civilizations of the Maya and the Aztec. We described the actions and characteristics of an Aztec ruler, more specifically Montezuma. We demonstrated an understanding of the words emperor, empress, and empire. We are going to illustrate key information about the Aztec. We identified important aspects of the Aztec cities and leaders. And in here, in just a moment, you are going to write a summary statement about the Aztec cities and leaders. All right, guys, thanks for watching. See you next time.